Good evening and welcome to this forum for U.S. Congress. Today, July 16, 2014. This forum featuring those persons who have filed for the 11th Congressional District. Sponsored this forum are the League of Women Voters Oakland Area and the Huron Valley School District. I would like to thank Dr. Baker and his staff for providing a location for this forum. I'm Jerry Burton, President of the League of Women Voters of Oakland Area, and I do not live in this district. The League of Women Voters is a trusted, national, nonpartisan organization. Our members do the hands-on work safeguarding democracy. While we never endorse or oppose any candidate or political party, we are directly involved in shaping the important issues that keeps our community strong. As a League of Women Voters member, I have the opportunity to contribute in leadership roles such as this that has great impact on local, state, and even national issues. If you're interested in learning about the League of Women Voters, I encourage you to pick up some of our literature on the table outside the room, or look at our website, lwvoa.org. The League of Women Voters did not endorse or support any political candidate or party. Views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, and the sponsors take no responsibility. The candidates will answer questions from our panel, and the moderator tonight is Carol King. Carol is an Emmy Award-winning senior producer and host of Michigan Matters, seen on CPS on Sundays. She's also Emmy Award writer on her TV special, Healthcare Act, and about Obamacare. Carol is a columnist for the Detroit Free Press, writing about business and politics. She also writes for CBS, Dome Magazine, the Michigan Chronicle, and other publications. Carol was also schooled in Detroit public schools and attended there where she was born. Ladies and gentlemen, Carol King will be our moderator.
There we go. It's off now. Okay. Thank you so much, Jerry. That's great. And good evening, everybody. It's so great to be here with you for this 11th Congressional District Forum. It's hosted by the Huron Valley High Schools and presented by the League of Women Voters of Oakland Area, which we've heard. The way that it'll work tonight is we'll begin by introducing the candidates seeking election to the position of U.S. Representative from the 11th Congressional District. Some quick background on the job. The position's a 2-year term with an annual salary of $174,000. This district includes in Oakland County 7 townships, part of West Bloomfield Township and the cities of Auburn Hills, Birmingham, Bloomfield Hills, and Troy. In Wayne County, the cities of Canton, Livonia, Northville, and Plymouth. Little background, too, on the forum of the League of Women Voters. The views expressed here are the views of the candidates only. The sponsors do not take responsibility for any of these views expressed. The format for this forum has been established by the League, and the candidates have signed a pledge to abide by the ground rules. We ask all of you a few things. One, to make sure that your phones are turned off, if you have anything, smartphones, whatever, that they're on silent mode. And we do ask that you hold your applause until the very end of this. The candidates have drawn for the order of speaking and will introduce themselves with a 1-minute opening statement. Following those statements, candidates will respond to a series of questions from our award-winning panel. Questions can be directed to a specific candidate or all the candidates. Each candidate will then have the opportunity to respond to any of the questions, and all responses to questions will be limited to 1.5 minutes and a rebuttal of 30 seconds. The order of who responds first will rotate. Questions and responses may only address issues that pertain to the position of a U.S. Congressperson. And then when we're done with the questions, each candidate will have 1 minute to make a closing statement. The order of the closing statements will be in the reverse of the opening statements. And as always, Personal attacks will not be allowed. We ask you please hold again all applause until we are done with the program. There is a member of the League of Women Voters who will be the timekeeper up front here. She will hold up the signs and let the candidates know where they are in the process here. So, opening statements. Congressman Carrie Benevolio is in Washington, is unable to attend. We'll hear from the other Republican opening statement with Dave Trott.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this forum this evening. I also want to thank my wife, Cappy, and my daughters, Taylor and Courtney, for being here. Washington is a mess. Nothing's getting done. Spending's out of control. And the politicians in D.C. do not have the courage to take on the difficult issues facing our country because they're only focused on getting reelected. I spent 30 years in business. I've started companies, I've created jobs, I've balanced budgets, I've signed paychecks, I've kept my promises to my employees and my clients and my customers. I think those skills could be put to good use in Washington, D.C., because, again, politicians do not realize that it's the private sector, not the government, that drives our economy. It would be an honor to represent you in Washington and work on the issues and opportunities that are important to this district. We all know that America can do better. Let's get started.
Now we'll hear from the Democrats. We'll start with Anil Kumar.
I'm Anil Kumar. I'm a urologist. And in 30 years of service that I have given to my community, I realized the degradation of our economy when my patients told me that I have either money for food or for pills. And I knew then that we have a problem. And so I looked up and I found Washington, D.C. totally dysfunctional. And I looked at myself and I said, why can I not fix the job myself? And I looked and I found myself a doctor, a businessman, a teacher, a technical person, and an immigrant, knowing everything that Congress would need. So I decided to run, and as a non-career politician, I hope that I will serve you as well as I can.
And now for Bobby McKenzie.
Good evening. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for making this night possible. I'd also like to thank my mother and my aunt and some dear friends who have made it here tonight. I grew up in Southeast Michigan, and I've spent the last 18 years working on some of the most complex problems facing our country and the world. 18 years ago, I started my career at the CIA as an analyst, as a graduate fellow. Never once did I hear anyone say, are you a Republican or a Democrat? Never once. Most recently, I was a senior advisor at the State Department trying to help the U.S. government keep our country safe. Same point. Never once did I hear anyone say, are you a Republican or Democrat? Yet if you look at what's going on in Washington, D.C. right now, it's dysfunctional. And it plays out right here in Southeast Michigan as well. One party shouting about the other. This is how people raise money. This is how they mobilize the base. My promise to the community, my promise to everyone in this room is you won't hear me shouting about Republicans or Democrats. I'm here to try and improve Southeast Michigan. There's too much on the line. Thank you very much.
Bill Roberts.
Thanks, everyone, for coming out tonight. I decided to run, and I ran for the same seat 2 years ago. And I'm doing so because if I were not to throw my hat into this race, certain issues which are life or death issues facing the nation would simply not be addressed. And one of these is the present collapse of the transatlantic financial system. 2 years ago, I warned that what the city of Detroit was facing was a manipulation of the financial system, which was going to put human lives second and the bailout of financial derivatives first. This is the exact same thing that's going on in Argentina right now. There are solutions. I'm putting those solutions on the table. It starts with the revival of Franklin Roosevelt's Glass-Steagall Act to shut down the bailout of Wall Street and restore the commitment to the real physical economy.
And Nancy Skinner.
Well, first of all, I would also like to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting these forums, because these forums are the great equalizers in elections. Elections, since Jeanette Rogers, our first female congressman, was elected, before women even had the right to vote, we know elections have been controlled by money, power, and let's face it, men. Since she was elected, there have been only 300 women elected to Congress. We're 53% of the electorate. We're 18% in Congress. We're 12% of Michigan's delegation. This seat has never been held by a woman. So, that's fairly obvious what's happening in the country. It's fairly obvious I'm the only woman here today. What's not so obvious is that I am a Democrat, and I am proud to be a Democrat, and I have a 21-year record being a Democrat, whereas my Democratic opponents reported by MERS News, did not even bother to vote in the last 2 general elections, so they didn't vote for President Obama. And Dr. Kumar gave Mitt Romney thousands and Snyder thousands, and Bobby McKenzie was endorsed by Joe Lieberman. So there is a clear contrast, and
stop.
I'll thank you. I hope tonight to discuss that.
Okay, and now let's introduce our panelists who will be posing the questions tonight. Starting with Bankley Thompson, who is the senior editor of the Michigan Chronicle, also noted author of various books. In the middle is Alex Thompson, not related. It's Thomson, who is an assistant professor of political science at Schoolcraft College. And to the right, or to your left to the audience, is Charlie Crum, noted political columnist for the Oakland Press. And as mentioned, the way that these questions will go is that we will do round-robin questions. And Bankley, why don't you ask the first question?
The first question goes to Dave Trout. It's last week marked 160 years since the Republican Party was founded in Jackson, Michigan. To put it in context, when you look 160 years, a lot went into those years. And today, how would you define the Republican Party?
Well, that's a great question. You know, the party has a long history and has certainly gone through a number of changes. Today, I think the party is divided, which is unfortunate. I think that division has been exacerbated by the divided government in Washington. Doesn't have to be the case, but I think that's a factor that's caused some of the division in the party. But I think it's a party of limited government, less spending, lower taxes, and really it's a party that stands for individual freedoms. And to me, the biggest threat in this, I think the party stands for this, the biggest threat to our freedoms is a massive federal government that just keeps growing and spending. And the people that I've talked to going door to door, they're concerned about our debt. They're concerned about regulations like the Affordable Care Act and Dodd-Frank that just put thousands of pages of regulations on small business. They're concerned about seniors are concerned about whether their promises the government's made are going to be honored. Veterans are bothered that their promises aren't being kept. They're worried about our borders. So I think the party stands for less government and returning more power to the people so that we can make our own decisions and decide how we want to live our lives and live the American dream. And I'm proud of those tenets of our party, and I think that's been a part of our philosophy for well over 100 years.
And reminder to the panelists as well, if you want to ask a broad-based question to all the candidates, you're able to do that as well. And since we've answered that to the one Republican on the panel, Dr. Thompson, why don't you ask the next question?
Thank you. This one will start with Dr. Kumar, and it's open to everyone, obviously, as we move down there. But one of the themes that comes out in your opening statements is the idea that Washington's broken, or perhaps it's not functioning the way we hope to. And it's no surprise public approval puts Congress at about 15%. It's on an uptick there. But one of the questions we have for is if you're seeking this post and taking that position on, you know, if voters will ask about bipartisanship or reaching compromise, and we'd like to know what do you see as barriers that stand in the way to that happening? And what do you have to offer that suggests that a different outcome's on the table?
Well, you brought up a nice situation, because that's exactly what is. Congress is totally dysfunctional, and actually that is the definition of insanity, and that's why it is dysfunctional. You elect the same people over and over again, and you expect different results. So it is not just Congress that is dysfunctional, it is us as the voters who are not doing the right job right. We are not selecting the right people for the job that we need it to be done. And the reason it is so polarized is because primary elections, not too many people go to vote. So therefore, there is a selection bias even at the primary level. And so you have ideologues that get selected or elected by primary ideologues that then go into a general, and we have ideologues in Congress. That's why the partisanship, and therefore it's not coming close. So the bottom line as to how we need to change this is by ourselves, taking up on ourselves to go to vote on the primaries. And that is what I have been advocating to start with. Unless we change that, our polarity will continue to sustain. Now, how am I going to change that? I am a very bipartisan person. I am a very independent thinker. I'm a doctor. I do not play sides. and I believe in the American people. So I am here to go
And we need to
to
stop.
represent
Time is up.
the people.
Anyone else on the question of dysfunction? Bill?
Look, I don't think we need a congressional love fest. I think there's certain fights that have to take place. One of those fights is that we've got a president who is completely outside of the Constitution. Now look, I'm a Democrat. I think that Dick Cheney should have been impeached for illegal wars. Certainly Barack Obama's invasion of Libya without congressional authorization constitutes high crimes and misdemeanors. And frankly, when he threatens Russia with all options are on the table, and he's backed up by Republicans like John McCain, when President Obama runs a Nazi coup in Ukraine and then blames Vladimir Putin, and then he's backed up by congressional Republicans who see nothing wrong with that, when we're actually on the verge of thermonuclear war, is crazy. I think President Obama must be impeached. There's splits in both parties, I think, on this, but clearly the crimes are there, the high crimes and misdemeanors.
Anyone else on Nancy?
I think you've just illustrated my point here, Bill. You got Sarah Palin on impeachment, and you're on impeachment, and everyone's on impeachment. You know, President Obama has repeatedly reached across the aisle. He went so far out of his way to extend his hand to the Republicans and to work across the table on initiative after initiative, and he has been shut down at every turn. So much so that you had members of Congress calling him a liar during the State of the Union address. It's a disgrace when they would not get anyone that he nominated, and any of them. They just stopped it. They stopped all legislation, anything that came from the president. He said, you know, I could declare a law declaring the American Pie constitutional, and they would not pass it. Or the American Pie American, they would not pass it. That is dysfunction. And it's this House of Representatives. It's this male-dominated House of Representatives. We need more women in there because I will tell you, women work together better. I always say women, if we ran the world, we'd have some fights, then we'd cry and we'd make up, we'd find a solution. Women are more collaborative. And when you have 18% in the House, I think that more women would find more solutions to the problems that we care about in our communities.
Anyone else on the question of dysfunction in Washington? Dave?
So it's dysfunctional for the simple reason that members of Congress, particularly the House, because it's a 2-year term, are singularly focused on one thing, which is making sure they get reelected. They get there, it's the best job they'll ever have, they want to make sure they get to go back. And that leads to individuals standing in front of microphones and throwing bombs at people so they can energize their base and get reelected. It also leads to inaction, because heaven help us if they would work on a problem and solve a problem, because when you solve problems, inevitably you end up offending some people because you have to make hard decisions if they're tough problems. So you don't want to work any problems, you want to throw bombs at each other. The way to solve that problem is you come back to the district, don't hide from your constituents, you show up, you listen to what they want to have you work on, and then you go to work on those problems, you report back to your constituents, and then as far as solving those problems in a bipartisan manner, in business, you don't solve problems in a vacuum. You call a group together, you come up with the best solution, and you work in a collaborative fashion. That would involve reaching across the aisle. That would involve demonstrating some common sense and pragmatic solutions. And I think I have that experience, and it would be an honor to go work in that capacity on your behalf.
Anyone else? Okay. Next question from Charlie Crum.
All right, I'd like to maybe drill down a little closer to the heart here in Michigan. Aside from congressional dysfunction, which has been discussed, spending habits in Congress have also come in for a fair amount of criticism. Given the fact that Congress has difficulty balancing its books, and we've just come off a winter that highlighted the problems with our infrastructure here in Michigan, particularly our roads, what is the role of Congress in resolving that problem as far as funding goes, and what specifically would you do to resolve that problem? To Bobby McKenzie.
Sure, great, thank you. I think it's an excellent question, and I think that there are areas where we can reduce our spending, but I also think we need to be growing our economy. And I think part of growing our economy is investing in our infrastructure that creates jobs. In terms of reducing spending, I would like to think a little bit about the ways in which we can focus on perhaps the defense industry. It's an industry that I know a little bit about, but post 9/11 it has grown tremendously. We have to do everything we possibly can to keep our country safe, to keep the world safe. But post 9/11, the situation in Washington, D.C. in terms of spending for national security issues for defense has grown at an astronomical level. And I certainly think that we need to take a hard look at the ways in which we can reduce some of that spending. And that will require bringing the right people to the table and having a healthy discussion around reducing some of that spending.
Anyone else on spending? Nancy?
I think the question, Charlie, was more to the economy, right, and the roads and the infrastructure?
As the infrastructure as an example of a problem that needs solving.
Yeah, okay, so it's a good one because, they're just fundamentally two different approaches here. Bill Clinton showed us the way. He inherited a $300 million deficit and a 7.5 unemployment rate, and he turned it into a massive surplus. They were more worried about having too much cash at the Federal Reserve. That was the big problem. You cut waste and you invest in people, innovation, and infrastructure. A major part of my campaign is about, as I've been working on renewable energy and jobs, is about Michigan should own renewable energies, wind, solar, geothermal, all these technologies we can make here. And one of the things we can do is use advanced road materials, because these roads got ripped up. We saw what happened this winter. In planning the infrastructure, what we need to do is plan these roads, not just as rebuilding roads and better roads. At MIT, they're using materials that expand and contract to fill potholes that are permanent. But I say it's where the rubber meets the road, and we start with better road materials. But there is a vision out there where we can even use, Pam Jackson, who has endorsed me at OCC professor, solar strips down I-75 that add power to the grid that can go all the way to Florida. Those are good jobs, better roads. Those are investments here, not overseas. Progressive economics works.
Anyone else? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Bill? I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Anil.
The Great Depression was a great example for us. The Great Depression, we came out of the Great Depression by investing in infrastructure. And although we are not in a depression, but it is a similar situation. But when you invest in infrastructure, or when you spend money, you have to collaterally also decide to start making money. So it's a double-pronged effort: invest money and then start to change our economy. How do you change your economy? The greatest detriment to our economy is jobs going overseas. Our kids don't have any jobs because they're all gone overseas. And in a simplistic economy model, more money is being going out of our country than coming in. So our median household income is coming down. That is where you get your taxes. That is where mainstream gets its money. So unless we reverse that, we are going to have these perpetual problems, and we'll be talking about repairing potholes year and year after. So we've got to start taking a stand on getting our jobs back to Michigan and states.
Bill, you were next up.
Oh, I'm sorry. When
Yes.
we want a rebuttal, do we just raise our hand to something?
You can't rebut them until everybody answers.
Okay,
Rebuttals
great.
have to hold off.
Okay.
Bill?
Look, economics is fundamentally a physical science, not simply a monetary process. There are some who would say balancing the budget is the most important thing. I disagree. When this country was founded, there was a gigantic monetary debt, larger per capita, inflation adjusted than there is now. Alexander Hamilton, and we can see this reflected in later heads of state, but Alexander Hamilton, as the first Treasury Secretary, said the country must grow first and then repay the debt. Then if you want to worry about a monetary balance, you worry about it later. This is done through internal improvements, increases in the platform of your economy. I think we need to go much more toward nuclear power. But first we have to shut down the Wall Street bailout by restoring the Glass-Steagall Act, Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal Act, which separates commercial banking from investment banking. This would put Wall Street's bad gambling investments through bankruptcy reorganization while allowing the real banking system to function. Then federal credit as part of a new national bank can be directed toward restoring physically productive employment, which we need to increase the revenue base. It's a physical process first. We have to have that conception of the future.
So the roads are obviously a problem. I was up in Highland for the Farm Bureau interview, and they asked a question about the roads, and I answered the question, and then driving home, hit a massive pothole on Telegraph and bent my rim. I thought maybe my answer wasn't good, didn't measure up perhaps, but But the problem is compounded by the fact that the highway trust funds is about to run out of money. And if we don't solve that problem very soon, then about 25% of all the money that's used for bridges and roads in this country will no longer be available. There's a number of solutions. I think the Ways and Means Committee has come up with the best solution, which is to solve the problem short term through May of next year to come up with about $10 billion from some other programs to fund it. Corker and Murphy want to raise the gasoline tax of 18.4 cents. Now, it hasn't been raised since 1993, so they're discussing that. I'm not sure that's the right solution. Boxer and Vitter have a good idea in that they want to have a 6-year solution, which is important because when you talk about the Highway Trust Fund, the local states need to have confidence that their projects are going to stop midstream, that the projects are going to be able to get completed and they can rely on the funding from the federal government. But what we need to do is take money from some other parts of the federal government and redirect it to America's infrastructure because it's in bad shape. And we've been doing a lot of talking with voters, and they want specifics. Well, here's some specifics on where the money could come from. We need to slow down the Department, shut down the Department of Education, the Department of Energy. We need to cut back on grant and aid and push the money to the states instead of the federal government controlling it, honoring the 10th Amendment as we should. We need to cut back on corporate welfare. Since 1980, they've doubled the number of corporate welfare projects in this country. Thank you.
Okay. So we have a rebuttal. Nancy, you wanted to rebut a question?
Yeah, it was something that, Dr. Kumar said that in the voter survey, the voter guide, that he wanted to bring jobs back, that was a solution, jobs that had gone overseas. Now, I'm on record, I was against NAFTA and GATT when that happened, but through tax incentives, trying to bring jobs back here. And the problem is that's just not going to happen. We are going to have to create entire new industries here to give businesses more tax cuts, and then the cash flow and the balances businesses are great. We need to invent new industries, not give more tax breaks and try and get those jobs back to come to Michigan.
Because you have raised, you didn't answer the question. You responded to something else, and now I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond, and then we'll move on to the next question. You had your hand raised.
Well, I hate to see somebody in Congress who says something cannot be done. I'm one who will bring jobs back to Michigan by incentivizing industry to come back. It's a big process. It's too short a period of time for me to explain to you, but I'm not a quitter. I will bring the jobs back.
Our next question from Bankalay Thompson.
Yes, my question goes to Bill Roberts. Bill, you used some very strong words. You said President Obama engaged in a Nazi takeover of Ukraine. You also use the words high crimes. Specifically, what evidence do you have to indicate, in fact, that the president should be tried for engaging in a Nazi occupation of Ukraine, which is a term that goes back to the dark days in human history? And also, do you feel that as a congressional candidate, is that a responsible statement to make on the campaign trail?
Well, I think it's a true statement. If you look at what our State Department actually has been backing, has been illegal coups. Now, this has been under the Bush administration and the Obama administration. In fact, certain countries have begun to identify colored revolutions where we fund political opposition parties that start off protest and lead into violence. They're saying these are actually acts of war. This administration is arming al-Qaeda-affiliated groups in Syria. And quite frankly, yes, the armed violence in Ukraine that was backed and that we were backing and verbally attacking the sitting government for was a Svoboda Party group that traces. It's a movement that traces its roots back to the SS collaborators that ran ethnic cleansing. These are people that say death to the Russians. So this is not an exaggeration if it has been blacked out, unfortunately, by the news media.
Let's move on to the next question. Professor Thompson.
Sure. I will start with Nancy here, but this is open to everyone. Just to shift gears a little bit and something close to home for what I see going on is the issue of student loan debt in the United States. Estimates put it at currently about $1.2 trillion. We know the amount that students carry on average is increasing. We know the number of students carrying is increasing. Default rates are, I think, 6 years in a row running on that sort of issue now. But specifically, when you look at that, do you see that as a chief concern for Congress? And if so, what type of federal action do you see being proposed, or would you support not only for students who are currently under this burden, but for future students entering into our colleges and universities.
Yes, it's the number one concern of young people is the burden of their college tuition. I went to the University of Michigan myself, and I paid for it myself. I'm the youngest of 6 kids, and I worked hard and still had student loan debt. The first thing President Obama did was he removed the middleman when he got into office. That helped a lot, so we didn't have banks taking their chunk out of it, but still colleges have become it has become unaffordable. And it goes to this previous question of how do we grow our economy? Well, it's not the same economy anymore. It's not the manufacturing base, although with new industries like renewable energy, all those different jobs. I fought hard for the film tax credits. I had a small business here in Troy, and I was getting students from Michigan, Wayne State, and all of them had film schools to stay in Michigan and have those jobs. So there, and of course, I fought Governor Snyder, and I led the effort with Mitch Albom and with Jeff Daniels to keep those tax credits. He took them away, and it was a terrible thing for Michigan. It was a terrible thing for the young people in Michigan. So now they're stuck with debt, and they don't have jobs. We can talk about the economy. The economy is a cycle. I'm a business major, and consumer demand gets cut off, and these kids, that's why they're not being hired, and they can't pay those loans back. There are things, and there are bills right now in Congress to be able to make college more affordable. And instead of giving further tax cuts to the wealthiest 1%, which is yet on the table again, I think that we got to start worried about the future, and those are our children.
Anyone else on the subject of student loans?
Yes, so, education is an investment, not an expense. Our students are overwhelmed and overburdened by the high debt that they go through. We have to hold colleges accountable for the excessive cost. We spend 3.2% of our GDP on education. We need accountability, we need transparency, and we need our students to get their debts forgiven. In medical circles, medical students, we have experimented with that. Hospitals have forgiven their debts. They stay in the community, they're productive citizens, and that is how we need to get, because globally, otherwise our students are being absolutely derailed, because students of other countries that have education for a very, very minimum amount are outspanning our kids, and therefore our kids are getting lower jobs, lower salaried jobs, and we are losing the expertise and the technology.
Dave?
So there's 37 million, mostly young people, who have student loans in this country. 7 million of them are in default. It's a huge crisis. Higher education bubble's about to burst. Part of the reason why they're in default is colleges have not done a good job of controlling costs. In the last 5 years, from 2007 to 2012, tuition went up 27% across the country, 20% adjusted for inflation. The other problem is that we don't have any jobs. It'd be great if people could graduate from college and go get a job and start paying back their student loans, but the economic recovery's been slow, and that hasn't helped. We need to continue to value engineer higher education so that it's affordable for people. We need to keep in place safeguards so that students aren't taken advantage of. I applaud the Illinois Attorney General. I think yesterday he announced, and I have no idea if he's a Republican or a Democrat, don't know his name, but yesterday he announced that he's cracking down on a bunch of sham artists in Illinois that are stealing these students blind. We need to keep focused on programs that promote skills so when young people graduate, they can have opportunities to get jobs. And then finally, we need to recognize that today, the students are not our traditional students. Sometimes they're single parents, they're veterans, and so we need to make sure the programs take that into account as well. I'll tell you what we can't do. If you look at an article from August of 2013 in the Wall Street Journal, it's entitled Obama State University. And if the tenets of that article move forward, it'd have the federal government picking winners and losers in higher ed. We can't have that.
Anyone else on? Okay. Bobby?
Sure. I'll tell you what, I was looking at this race for quite some time, looking at this district for quite some time, and I think about the story of my younger brother. Did his undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan, did his master's degree at the University of Michigan, great grades, great kid, very ambitious. Spent 6 months unable to find work here in Michigan. 6 months. Moves to Chicago, finds work there in a week. Spends a couple of years there. Goes to New York City, no problem. Spends a couple of years there. Now lives in Washington, D.C. Why isn't he here? This is a story that I hear every day out on the trail, regardless of one's political leanings. We got to get this thing right. We got to make sure that people can find jobs when they get done with school. And part and parcel of that is back to the question, they can't be swamped in student debt. Man, we're talking largely about higher education right now. What about those who don't have the opportunity to get higher education? What about those that need technical skills or a community college degree? We've got to make sure that we've got the right skill set for the right students so they can find work, and most importantly, they're not swamped with debt. Southeast Michigan, once upon a time, was one of the greatest places to live in the country. Our number one export were cars. Our number one export now are bright young minds. We've got to reverse this. Absolutely must reverse this.
So I think it comes right back to the question of the overall economic collapse process. One is, look, education, the cost of education, especially compared to the quality, is an area in which you could say in the last 13 years, you're looking at the real cost of inflation in the economy. But you can see it in food, you can see it in rent, a number of things. This is actually a function of what you could call it's now quantitative easing, money pumping to bail out financial assets. It drives the price of other things up. So one thing is people can't find jobs coming out of college with huge debts. But the other thing is this is the real tax of bailing out Wall Street. It's in healthcare too. Now, I think what we need is a new Apollo program for young people, a science driver project. I think it should be in fusion energy, and this can help drive much of the rest of the economy, including the machine tool sector, which we need here.
Next question from Charlie Crum.
Yeah, I think I'd like to follow up a little bit more with the student debt thing. More specifically, if you are elected to Congress and you're a member of Congress, what specific short-term solutions could there be while you work on the long-term problem about how to fund training and education programs?
Well, did you want me to start with that, or were you going to?
If there's no objection, I was
That's
going to go back to Mr.
Okay.
Trott, but.
Okay, yeah, because you had
it's
said,
kinda
you
cyclical.
You started last time. Why don't we start at this
Yeah,
end of the
sure.
table then, Dave?
Well, there are a number of proposals being bantered about in Congress to help the students who are underwater. I think the best thing we could do is get the economy moving so they can become gainfully employed and deal with their student loan debt. I don't have any specific proposals on what I would do to deal with the debt. Any proposal to help the students repay their debt, it seems to me, because it's such a crushing amount of debt, and it's generational. I mean, some of these students are going to spend 10, 20 years repaying the debt. That's not a prospect. I have my daughters here that they to start out your career and have half your paycheck go to paying down student loan debt. That's not a good place. It doesn't help the economy, and we need to work on it. And I'd feel much better about the federal government spending money to help young people stabilize their financial situation than I would about quite a few of the other programs they spend money on.
Anyone else from this end? Anil?
Yes, the issue of short term, the debt is the debt. And therefore, we need to figure out how we can reduce the debt for these young individuals and have forgiveness plans. For example, industry that is subsidized by our government should have these programs that if the individual works for these companies for 5 or 7 years, that over a period of time, the debt gets reduced or forgiven. What it does is that it keeps these people working in the industry, in the area, for example, Michigan. And so we in Michigan will not lose these individuals, because in 5 to 7 years, guess what? They have a family, their kids are going to school, and now we have maintained these kids here. And the long term, as I have said over and over again, it's the economy. Before that, we need to go into accountability. We need to figure out why these colleges are so darn expensive. Other parts of the world, education is 1/5 the cost, and sometimes even better. How can they do it, and we are not able to do so? And the third is economy. Get the jobs back to Michigan, because once you have more money in your pocket, everything becomes easy. And that's what we need to do.
Sure, something very specific on that point. Right now, as I understand it, students have 6 months before they have to start repaying. And so I think we might want to look at extending that period of time. If someone comes from a wealthier family or even a very solid middle-class family, it's not a problem. They can stay at home. They can have their parents help them start repaying that debt. But there are many students that don't have that luxury. And so that 6-month period when they have to start repaying, I mean, that's a dark looming cloud for them. And so I think one of the things that we would look very specifically at is how could we extend that period of time. And we can talk about getting the jobs back, but that's not going to happen on accident. I think that we need to be setting up communities of interest. I think we need to be bringing the right people to the table to have a healthy discussion about what can we do to make sure that we're finding jobs for students as soon as they finish school or shortly thereafter. What can we do to incentivize industry right here to hire those students and try and fill positions that they need filled?
Again, this is a systemic economic question. There are many areas of this sort in which there is inflation occurring massively because we do not have a real productive economy anymore. So there are specific systemic solutions, I think, for dealing with an economy that has gone through this process of breakdown of our productive capacity. But to deal with it one by specific areas, I don't think is the approach necessarily.
Charlie, there's a bill in Congress right now to reduce the income. A lot of the students were locked in at a time before we are at a historically low interest rate period, Bill. We're in a deflationary cycle. They're locked in at 6%, and there's a bill right now to just refinance them at these lower rates, like 2.5%. That bill has no chance of passing because it's stuck in the House of Representatives. The Republican-controlled and dominated House of Republicans are stopping this bill that would pass the Senate, that would ease the burden on college students and their loans. That's number one. The larger problem, though, is income inequality. Even Alan Greenspan, our former Fed chairman, said it is the biggest threat to our economy. We've continued to cut taxes, the capital gains tax. We're sending money, we're sending it to the wealthiest 1%, who are sending it to offshore tax havens where it's an unproductive asset. I have, as a business major from the University of Michigan, I've come up with some innovative ways to fix that. For example, when you get for the higher end people, income people in America, we have a couple of pretty wealthy people right here. When you can afford a 15-year mortgage instead of a 30-year mortgage, that's about $150,000 savings. If we gave them a tax credit to invest in education and funding and financing at the education so that the next generation has the opportunities to be a millionaire, that's what we should do.
Frank Lloyd Thompson of the Michigan Chronicle with the next question.
The next question is an open-ended question, and here are your district members, if you can be honest in this answer. Washington is broken, you've all said that, but we know that seniority matters a lot in Washington. And so explain to us, when you get to Congress, how will you navigate the difficult question of seniority in order to become the advocate that you're advocating here this evening? Any of you can take it.
Well,
you can go ahead.
Well, Saul, that's the whole art of the politic. Because that is negotiation, that is working with people. So if there are senior members and I'm a freshman, then I will make sure that I discuss with them, go across the aisle, cajole them, persuade them to see my point of view. And that is one way that I have known that one can overcome seniority. We all had our parents, they were seniors, they always had roles, but we always knew how to negotiate those rules to make them see our point of view so things get done. And that's what I would do, and I've done it all my life. Any successful person is successful because of the art of politics. And I have been fortunate enough to do that, and I will continue to do that in Congress.
I'll be completely honest. The first thing that I'm going to need to happen when I'm a member of Congress is that we're going to have a whole bunch of people from the district come down to DC to get anything accomplished. The only way anything happens in DC that goes against the status quo is that people light a fire under the rear ends of their congressmen. And there just has to be a sense that has to occur. Frankly, when President Obama said that he was going to start launching missiles against Syria, it was because the Congress members were getting 300 calls a day saying this is a bad idea from their constituents. So you're just going to have to come with me to D.C. and make sure that these congressmen do something. One member of Congress isn't going to do it by themselves. If we need some drastic changes, starting with getting Wall Street out of the Congress, by shutting down the bailout, the financial derivatives. These members of Congress are owned. And there's no, one member of Congress, they've got to really have an army. People, the American population really has to start becoming much more demanding of what has to happen in the Congress.
And
Yeah.
Oh, is
Sure.
this-
Oh.
Can I I didn't get to answer that question. Bankole, so to the, your question about seniority and, or did you already answer it, Bonnie?
Go ahead, and then I'll circle back after you.
Oh, I
Go
thought
ahead.
you had, okay, go ahead, I'm sorry. I thought you had.
No, I had not.
Okay, sorry, my bad.
I think I want to circle back to a point that Dave Trott mentioned earlier, and I'm not sure that he and I will see eye to eye on a number of issues, but one thing that he did bring up that I think is an excellent point here is that the number one priority of everyone in Congress is being reelected, and this is a problem. The fact of the matter is that any first-term congressperson, any second-term congressperson, unless they're individually wealthy and they can self-fund, they will spend at a minimum 50% of their time fundraising. If they don't, they won't be in office next term. Those who are running for Congress, one needs to spend 90% of their time fundraising. If they don't, they won't be in Congress next term. How does one get things done? You have to probably ruffle some feathers and once in a while even agitate people into action. I've worked on some very complex problems. I was in the Arab Gulf for a year and a half. I established a center for the US government as the project leader of that effort. I worked with 29 different capitals, senior officials in each capital. These were people that just didn't have different political views. These were people who had vastly different worldviews. And in that capacity, I had to bring people to the table that I perhaps wouldn't want to have a cup of coffee with under different circumstances, but it was about finding common ground and finding real-world solutions to try and keep our country safe, to try and keep the world safe. And so I think if I want to be an effective member of Congress, it's about finding common ground. It's not about shutting down the government as we did back in October. It's not about shouting. It's about trying to find common ground.
Nancy?
Well, I think the question was about the loss of seniority in the Michigan delegation and how that will affect Michigan and getting things done. And this is kind of a common theme I'd like everyone to think a little bit about. What have all of us done? What have we done? So, for instance, I was in the media now for 15 years, and I've interviewed many members of Congress, both sides of the aisle. So I know a lot of members of Congress. Senator Dick Durbin, number 2 in Congress, was on the first guest on my radio show when I pioneered progressive radio because Democrats did not have a voice out there. But Congressman Peter King, I've interviewed lots of these people. I have personal relationships with them, including the President of the United States. It's no secret that I ran 10 years ago for a U.S. Senate seat in Illinois in a primary against a little-known state senator who had no chance of winning, and I lost to POTUS. I lost to Barack Obama. We had dinner, and he came here and laughed and teased each other, and he came here in 2006. He called me his sharpest opponent, and he heartily endorsed me and said he would help me in any way. So that's a pretty good relationship to have, the President of the United States and a lot of members of Congress. But what have I done? I fought for those auto bailouts. I used my perch there in the media. I camped out in an apartment in New York City with just plumbing, and I called the White House and David Axelrod, and I went on TV, and I said, if we did not get these bailouts, our region was going down. So I have been using my relationships and have been working for 21 years for Michigan.
Dave?
Gosh, Nancy, part of me wishes you'd done a little better back in 2004, but so the congressman has 2 jobs. Congressman has 2 jobs: help the people in his or her district with problems and opportunities, and work on solving problems that are affecting our country. Back in 1981, when I graduated from Michigan, I went to work for Bill Broomfield, who was the congressman from Oakland County from 1956 to 92. And he had an outstanding customer service operation. He had a very seasoned staff. They took good care of people in the district. So if you lost your passport, if you need help convincing a business to locate in the district, he did a good job on that. There's no question, Professor, I think it was your question, that seniority is an issue. I think my approach is going to be to pick a couple issues that I know something about and try and make a difference on those issues. If someone asks me to be on some committee to solve the long-term solvency problem of Social Security, I won't shy away from that opportunity because I'm worried that it's a tough issue and I might offend someone back in the district. I'll work on tough issues as well as issues I know something about. And I'll try and present common sense solutions where even Democrats will have to look at me and say, gosh, that's a pretty good idea. Let's try and work together. And the story I tell in that regard is I was up at the chamber meeting earlier this year, and I ran into Hanson Clark, and I don't know how he's doing in his race in the 14th, but he said, hey, Dave, hopefully we'll both, and he was just idle chat, but he said, hey, Dave, hopefully we'll get to Washington, and maybe you and I can work together to make some improvements on Dodd-Frank. I have some ideas. And so that kind of bipartisan effort, even if you have low seniority, I think you can make a difference.
Anil?
Well, that goes down again to the selection of candidates. And I keep imploring us, the people, we have to keep selecting the right people. Because the right people can get things done right. And so, given the opportunity, I will be absolutely be able to work with Congress, with seniors, with bipartisan members, and get things done.
I mean, I think there's a couple of issues here, and I don't want to belabor the point that I just made. But I would say that there's, the fact of the matter is 750,000 people live in this district. 508,000 people are registered to vote. Under the best of circumstances, the very best of circumstances, just under 290,000 will vote in November. People are put off by the partisan politics. So I agree with my friend Anil here about we need to have the best people, but guess what? Most people don't want to even vote. Most people don't want to get out. People are so put off by the system. And it's shouting about one side or the other side. You want to fix things, really, Professor? Let me tell you what you'd have to do. You'd have to have term limits, and you also have to set some sort of boundaries on fundraising. In Florida this cycle, one of the most expensive races of this cycle, David Jolly, Alex Sink, cost $10 million, that race, $10 million. How many scholarships would that be? How many roads could we fix? How many schools could we improve with that money? But that's not the system we have. And so the system we have means it is a race to see who can raise the most money, to put up the fancy commercials, to try and fashion a narrative in an easy-to-grasp way that they're going to try and fix things when, in fact, most people will not fix anything at all. And they will hold on to that seat for as long as they can and do their very best to shout about the other side. And the sad reality is, Professor, while the question is a fantastic one, I don't think there are any easy solutions.
Professor Thompson?
I appreciate the answer to my non-question. So I'll give credit to my panelists here. But I did want to go back to something that Dave mentioned here in his answer that, as a professor, we talk about on students, is this question of representation. As a U.S. Congressman, you are going to be representing the nation on issues, and you are from a district that has specific problems and a constituency here. And one of the things that's been in the news is obviously the droughts in Texas and California. And this past February, the Canadian ambassador singled out the issue of diplomatic dealings on water as being one of the top topics he saw in the coming years between the United States and Canada. And clearly that's a resource item that's important to this, this region and this state. And so I would ask you, as a member of Congress from this area, what actions do you see yourself taking to represent the country, but also protect the resources that are so vital to this state and this district? And we can start, whoever would like to.
I'll start with that because it's my signature issue. Is that what you're saying? We could all start with it?
Sure.
Water? Okay, water, so it's no secret that I've been working on sustainable development for 21 years. I got my business degree, but read Earth in the Balance back in '93. And I realized when businesses adopt the idea of renewable energy technologies, then innovation would follow. So the Great Lakes, if you go to my website, right there, I've been so alarmed, I've been raising the alarm bells because there are two pipelines running underneath the Straits of Mackinac right now that are pushing 2.1 million gallons of tar sand oil underneath them. So the video on my website is divers from the World Wildlife Federation went down there and they have video, and these pipelines are in terrible disrepair right now. The supports are gone, and if they were clamoring for some action, I put it out on my website. I've been campaigning on it. If they were to break, they were laid in 1958, these pipelines, and we're not getting any answers from Enbridge, the company in Kalamazoo. So just last week, the Great Lakes Fishery Commission called for their immediate replacement. The first act I will do as your congresswoman, you said congressman, congresswoman, is to call Enbridge before my committee and say, what are we doing about these pipelines? We have 21% of the fresh water on this planet. We can use it to have businesses come and live here and grow here, but not if that resource is destroyed. And it is a major issue. I will never let anyone acquire our water, but we have to protect our Great Lakes, and it's on all my surveys on your form, #1 for me, our water. Water is the new oil.
Bill?
I think the real major crisis right now in water is in Texas and California. We have water here, but look, there's a lot of our food, including our cattle. Cattle comes largely from places like West Texas, where there's been a huge reduction in the head of cattle in these areas because of massive drought. The Central Valley in California is where a lot of the vegetable production and the fruit production in this country comes from. These areas are actually collapsing. People may not know this, but the orchards, we are in a drought that some scientists at the Berkeley, California, has said that this could last for something like 100 years. This has to do with the cycles that the sun go through, which are very long cycles. There's certain things that we have to develop scientifically to intervene into this. In the longer term, we can have major water projects of the type that even Robert Kennedy had proposed back in the day, something like a NWAPA, North American Water and Power Alliance project, to move large amounts of water. But I think there's short-term solutions which involve nuclear desalination and shutting down fracking, which is insane because it uses a gigantic amount of water, largely in areas that are under drought conditions, to extract the same old energy density of fuel that we've been consuming for years and years. So that should be repealed as an immediate short-term solution.
Anyone else? Okay, let's move on to the next question then. Charlie Crum?
Change it up again a little bit or change it back to where we started. I believe Bankley asked the first question of the night to Dave Trott when he asked him to define the Republican Party. I think it's only fair to ask the Democrats how they define the Democratic Party, starting with Bill Roberts.
Okay. Well, I think that the Democratic Party needs to return to the approach of John F. Kennedy and FDR. I think the tendency in the party, especially since I've been dealing with the Congress, has come much more under the influence of Wall Street and then the global warming, greenie hysteria, which is not scientific. The conception that John F. Kennedy had, which is missing today, is that the way that we achieve peace in the world is through collaboration with the other world's superpowers. He even wanted to collaborate in space development with the Soviet Union. There are major projects that they're offering, that China's offering collaboration on. We should take them up on that rather than encircling them with thermonuclear submarines and missile systems. FDR understood that you do not put profit above human life. We can learn this lesson in the case of Detroit, which is really the face of the destructive effect that Wall Street, and the City of London in this case too, has had on the economy of the United States. Glass-Steagall needs to be restored to bankrupt the criminal speculators on Wall Street. In Detroit's case, I pointed out 2 years ago that it was the City of London and Wall Street manipulation of the interest rates which rigged the financial instruments of Detroit, bilking them out of sometimes $4 million a month. It's not right.
Any other Democrat on the Democrats?
Yes, Democrats are people of the middle class. We are the people that we will protect the middle class because some have defined civilization as an intellectual barbarism. And what it means is that intellectually and with wealth, people are able to manipulate the poor and the not so endowed. So it then depends, it is incumbent upon the representatives like us, the Democrats, who have to protect our people. So we have to find the difference between Wall Street and Main Street, because corporations will make sure that Wall Street goes well, But who's going to look out for the Main Street? Who's going to look out for the median household income of the people? Who's going to look out for how much money the person has for buying food, for paying the bills? And so that's the Democrat Party. We are the party of the heart, and we will continue to do so.
Oh, yes. I absolutely think there's a stark difference. And I think the difference lies in the fact that that the Democratic, and if you look out throughout our economic history, the Democrats are looking at this country as a whole and what is best for the United States as a whole. So I mentioned Bill Clinton's economic record of cutting waste but investing in innovation and growth. What we've seen happen in the ideology of the Republican Party has been tax cuts for the wealthy throughout the Bush administration. And what happens? It's a no-lose situation. That's why we got into the Great Recession that the president inherited. Because who creates jobs? It's not the top 1%. It's consumers. Consumers do. And when consumers and the middle class is broke, they can't spend any. And so when they can't spend anything, businesses have to cut back, and they lay off employees, and they lose their house. And when someone loses their house, guess what? Someone next door's property value goes down. And there's a downward cycle in the economy. And that's what happens. And so when we look at what's good for this country, we have to say, climate change, Bill, you couldn't be more wrong. Every scientist, US, NASA, NOAA, National Department I've made climate change the center and most urgent threat facing humanity. And it is. And to deny it, to put our heads in the sand because oil interests will benefit, is not looking out what's best for America or best for this country. And the solution is the best thing that Michigan can do. If we embrace this and build those jobs and protect our resources, then it is dealing with it and caring for our country and this world.
Bobby?
Thank you. I'm a Democrat, but I'm an independent thinker. But I embrace the Democratic Party largely because it's about people. It's about us. It's not about big business. It's not about corporations. It's about trying to help people move forward. That's it.
Bankley?
Yeah, the
I
relationship
guess I
between...
can't weigh in on,
Oh, I'm sorry.
on what the Democratic Party represents. Maybe
No,
they were
wait,
kind
wait,
enough not to
but
chime
wait,
in on
but
the
wait,
Republican Party. Maybe
we
I
did
should-
not allow the
Yeah,
Democrats to wait on that, so
yeah,
we equal time
I'll,
here.
I'll
so.
stand down.
Save
since
that
they
for
were
after. You can
kind
do
enough
interviews
not
after.
to
How's
opine
that?
on the Republican Party.
Okay. Bankley?
Yes, the relationship between the federal government and the state is very crucial in terms of whatever you're going to do when you get to Congress. Can you define for me how would you describe the current relationship between the federal government and the administration of Governor Rick Snyder? And are there any issues that you have with the current administration in Lansing?
Sure, yeah. Are there differences? That I have with
You're running as a federal official.
Sure.
How would you describe the current relationship between the federal government and the state of Michigan through Governor Rick Snyder? And are there any issues that you have with the current administration in Lansing?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the way in which the creation of the emergency financial manager for the city of Detroit, many other cities in the state, the way that this happened, this is a dictatorial takeover, I think, of a city, taking away people's democratic rights. So I think there is that issue. I think this is an effect of the breakdown of the function of the federal government. I think this right-wing reaction largely, I think it has largely come from the failure of Democrats to oppose policies that Obama started his administration with. But I mean, I will say that this is an approach which only benefits Wall Street. I mean, there was a serious attempt to strip people's pensions in the city of Detroit, the public workers, under the rationale that what should be upheld first are gambling debts of Wall Street and City of London banks. I think this requires the federal government to weigh in and look at these cases and say, look, this financial system is bankrupt.
So I think the current relationship between the state of Michigan and the federal government is strained. I think it's that way because the federal government doesn't listen to the states, certainly not just Michigan, but all states. Federal government, Congress, the president certainly thinks they have all the answers. They are constantly sending unfunded mandates back to the states that create significant state budget issues. The Affordable Care Act has been unilaterally changed by the president 38 times. Whether that's constitutional or not, we can have a good debate on that. That creates uncertainty for the states and certainly for small business. And I'm a big believer in the 10th Amendment. 10th Amendment says the federal government has certain expressly delegated powers, and all other powers are left to the states and the people. And if you look at how the states are doing, more often than not, the states are balancing their budget and their programs are more effective than the federal government. So I'm a big believer that what the federal government needs to do is get out of the way and push the money back to the state government or the local municipalities if, in fact, the government needs to be involved. And I applaud, the governor put out a proposal to allow visas to stay in play or to have a visa program to keep some recent graduates from leaving our state, and I think that was largely ignored.
Anyone else? Nancy?
Oh, sure. There's a big problem between the relationship in Michigan and the federal government. Governor Snyder's just largely taken credit for what we had to go through with this economic recovery and the stimulus and TARP and everything that the president had to do when he inherited the worst economic recession since the Depression. It wasn't just this Republican governor who recovered and took credit for it. It was the entire nation. And so, what did he do? He took $1.8 billion and he taxed seniors, and he took it out of schools, and he gave it to corporations. That's the same mentality that the Republicans do. Give corporations more money, and they hurt the seniors, and they hurt the schools. So how we need to work together, for instance, is the federal government in Canton, Michigan just set up something, $180 million for an innovation manufacturing institute to look at the development of light metals, aluminum, titanium, and new strong metals for wind engine turbines and for newer, more fuel-efficient cars. Those are the kind of partnership. It's cutting waste, but it's investing. And as your Congresswoman, I'm going to be laser focused on looking at all the panoply of technologies that are out there. Michigan has all the manufacturing and engineering base that we need to advance the fastest growing industry on earth, and that's the energy industry. We started it with advanced batteries. There's so much further to go. We could be doing offshore wind farms out in the Great Lakes when they replace those pipelines that I'm going to have them replace. So we need a cooperative and investment in Michigan. We're a donor state, and we got to fix it.
Anyone else?
Sure. Dave Traub may be right when he says the federal government doesn't listen to states. But guess what? Lansing doesn't always listen to its voters. And we need to be doing a whole lot more to be investing in our infrastructure here. We need to be doing a whole lot more to be investing in our public schools. And these are things that are hugely important. And I think we need to be moving these things forward.
Anil, anything?
Well, there's always going to be strain between the federal government and the states. And it is incumbent upon our leaders to work through them. And at this point in time, I really do not see a major issue between the federal government and our state. But if there is, then we need to, as individuals, as citizens, need to write to our leaders and make sure that we're going the right path.
As moderator, I have a little bit of leeway here. I'm going to ask the last question, and I'm going to break ranks a little bit here. We're going to go with a 30-second answer. That's okay with you? 30 seconds on this. And there's no rebuttals on this. So we're sitting here at Milford High School, all these people in the audience here, people at home watching this, they want to learn more about you, that's why they're taking time to do it. It's the American way. So I'm going to ask each of you, 30 seconds or left, starting with you, Dave, first. What is the biggest difference between you and your opponent, or opponents in the case of the Democrats here? 30 seconds.
Well, my opponent at the moment is Congressman Bentivolio. He's not here. He doesn't hold town hall meetings. He doesn't come back to the district and listen to people. The issues he wants to work on are chemtrails and FEMA camps. He doesn't want to work on jobs and the economy. And he's not someone that I think is an effective voice for our party or the district. And I think with my background in business, it's much different than his background. I think I can be an effective representative for the people of this district.
Let me break ranks here in order here. Bill, why don't we start with you?
Okay.
Again, you're speaking specifically on the other Democrats.
Okay. Well, I think the biggest difference between me and other Democrats here is that they will not discuss certain issues which I think are life and death issues. And one of these is the fact that we're now in a situation where the transatlantic banking system is breaking down. 80% of this planet is moving to put in place an alternative bank to the IMF. And no one else here is discussing this fact that we do not have that clout that we used to have.
Nancy?
I would say the difference between my Democratic opponents and I is that I've been at this 21 years now. I have a presidential award. I've won. This is my third run for Congress as a Democrat, whereas my opponents just showed up. They didn't even vote. They've never voted. They've never run for office. They haven't been involved in any issues. And so, it's one thing to get your name on a ballot and call yourself a Democrat. It's another to have 21 years and be written up in a book and go to my website, skinnerforcongress.com, and read all that I have done. Because you've got to look at people's resume. What have they done? That's what's going to predict what they will do.
Bobby?
That's a great point. Let's look at my resume. I've spent 18 years working on some of the most complex problems facing our country and the world. And I've done a pretty good job at that. I'm a problem solver. I work well with people. And I'm not going to compare myself to my opponents. I'm going to tell you what I can do, which is work hand in hand with everybody on both sides of the aisle to get things done, as well as agitate people on both sides of the aisle to get things done. Vote for me on the 5th of August. Thank you very much.
As for me, I have lived in this community for the last 30 years, served the community as a doctor, as a church-going person, as a father, as a family person. I'm a businessman. I own a surgical center. I know how to create jobs. I have 30 employees. I've also saved a hospital from bankruptcy. I'm a teacher. I'm a medical political person, and an innovator and an immigrant. So I understand all the problems that we have that we can solve from Congress.
And now it's time for our closing statements. They'll be in the reverse order of how we did the opening statements, which means among the Democrats, Nancy Skinner, you go first. You got 1 minute.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, everyone, for being here. There's been some chuckles about when I mentioned that there aren't enough women in Congress. But that couldn't be more true. We're seeing there truly is a war on women in this country. And I made some fun in an ad of Terry Lynn Land, who thinks that's not happening. When you have 18% in Congress of women and we're 53% of the electorate, there's a terrible imbalance there. Men have had the power and the money, and they often get elected because of those relationships, when my resume, I think, clearly suggests that I have worked hard for people on these issues of communities. And so I ask people, my mother is in surgery right now. She's 83 years old and went under at 5:30, and I was not going to come to this for a knee replacement, and she's got heart failure. And she told me, I want you to go, Nancy, because you've spent your whole life working for this. And this time, people are going to listen to you. So, pray for my mother. I have the record. I'm here. We need more women in Congress. And I ask for your vote on August 5th.
Well, John F. Kennedy had a sort of slogan in his book, Profiles in Courage, which is, you put principles before party. Maybe not everyone here agrees with some of the things that I discussed, but at least I'm honest with you about them. I take a principled approach. I ran for the seat 2 years ago, called for the impeachment of President Obama, and got 41% of the Democratic vote in the primary because I put forward a program that actually identified what the nation is facing. I warned that if President Obama was not held responsible for the violation of the War Powers Act and invading Libya, that we could very well have an invasion of Syria. I was correct. President Obama tried to do that. There are 4 specific economic laws which I've identified on my website which address the current breakdown of the transatlantic issue, which is the leading problem we're facing right now.
To ask ourselves, what kind of country do we want to live in? What kind of state do we want to live in? What kind of Southeast Michigan do we want to live in? And I'll tell you what, I've watched every single debate for the other congressional seats, and they all sound very similar. Back to the points earlier about what differentiates. How do you make any difference? How do you change anything? Both parties are going after each other. We got to work hand in hand. I'm the only person at this table that's going to do that. I'm the only person at this table that I promise you will agitate people on both sides of the aisle to do that. I'm going to tell you, you don't get anything done in life sometimes without agitating a few people. Doesn't mean that everybody likes you, but they certainly will respect you. We've got to improve Southeast Michigan. I tell you the story of my younger brother. He's not the only one. There are thousands of others who have had to flee the state. We got to reverse this. Thank you very much.
For many years, I've told my children that we live in the best times in history, and it has not come to us for free. It has come because of sweat, blood, and tears of people before us. And the least we can do is improve it or sustain it, and better if we can improve it. Having said this for years and years, after 30 years, seeing what I see, I've decided I need to give back to society. I need to give back to this country that I love because I have come from overseas. And I need to protect our people who should no longer say that I do not have money, I can either have food or my pills. So I have dedicated myself to doing this task. I feel myself completely qualified to do the job. As a matter of fact, some people say it's overqualified, but I will do the best for my country. And God bless America.
I want to thank the League of Women Voters again for organizing this forum. I also want to thank my opponents. I admire the fact that you're running, and while we disagree perhaps on the direction of the country, I do hope I have the opportunity to debate one of you again in the fall. This election, the question is pretty simple. It's what should the role of the federal government be in our lives? I think it should be as little as possible. The federal government's too big and too inefficient to do much of anything. Federal government shouldn't be interfering with the patient-doctor relationship. Federal government shouldn't be telling us what our kids' school curriculum should be. Federal government shouldn't be wasting tax dollars when veterans are suffering. I've been at this about 10 months now, and it's a great process. People say running for office is a nasty process. I've enjoyed it tremendously, and as I go door to door, two things are evident. First, people love our country, and second, people believe that if we work together, there's no problem we can't solve. I appreciate your consideration. I appreciate the fact that I live in this great country. Thank you for being here this evening, and have a great evening, and God bless America.
And I want to thank all of our candidates. The League truly appreciates you all taking time to be part of this, and to our panelists as well. We'd like to thank Oakland University for making this forum possible, and Orion Neighborhood Television for recording it for voter viewing on cable TV. What did I say? Oh, okay. Wrong script, wrong debate. This was a debate a few weeks ago. All right. You know where we are. We all know where we are here. It'll be broadcast several times on cable and municipal stations throughout the 11th Congressional District, and you can contact your local cable company for the dates and times of showing. This information will also be made available on the League's website as lwvoa.org. And the League has prepared a voter guide for the upcoming preliminary election, which is also available online. We hope this candidates forum has been beneficial and will help you cast an informed vote. And please remember to vote on Tuesday, August 5th. And now it's time for that round of applause we've been waiting for.